Hello and welcome to A Case for Black Metal's Greatest Album. Today we're going to be doing the one and only Mayhem's Mysteriis Dom Sathanas. Joining me today is Tempestuous Might of the Tempestuous Might YouTube channel, who's recently done Best of Death Metal 2023 and Best of Black Metal 2023. Joining us is Malus from Apokatastasis.
Hey,
And for the first time, joining us is Eric Crass from, Spare Not Thy Sharpest Blades and the Occult Abyss Podcast. Thank you all for
Greetings.
coming on today. So, this is a monumental album. Its influence goes far beyond the metal, far beyond the music. It's a real piece of Norwegian pop culture as well, right? Kind of like
Oh, truly.
how insane music can get, right? And I think it's not very interesting because there've been so many books, movies, interviews, fucking ramblings, essays, whatever you want about this album. So I think,
you guys know that Dead killed himself?
oh my God.
That's dark.
Yeah.
I
Did
really
you know
like
that
how
Nick's
like
cat is
Darkest
in
band in
the
history.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, we need to, none of that stuff is particularly interesting or important to what we're doing today. So, Tempestuous, start us off with the background of this album.
Okay, so this was a work of 6 years, according to Euronymous. In one of his final interviews in '93, he said he'd been working on the album since '87. And if we look at live in, that German town, I won't try to pronounce it here, but they had four of the eight songs were already in some sort of form by 1990. And I think in a '91 interview, he claimed that five tracks of the album were done, and he needed to write three more. And Euronymous claimed that this album is not riff based, and that's something that we haven't really seen yet too much in metal. It wasn't riff based; it was composition based, and that comes from his words himself in an interview.
Yeah, I mean, despite this being their first, full length, they were already a very influential band. The live in
Oh yeah,
Leipzig, that that is one of like the key records when it comes to black metal's defining aesthetic in terms of production, drumming, vocals. Everything was kind of like set in stone with that recording, really.
I would argue that's the first black metal full length
Yeah, I
because
mean,
there are bootlegs of it that came out before '93, and they had a small like circulation of it before '93.
so yeah,
yeah, one trait that I really like about this album is the Latin lyrics on the title track are almost completely wrong. He just
Oh yeah.
he he consistently like misspells a lot of Latin parts, and I don't know, that's always been interesting to me. You can definitely tell that it was made by a bunch of teenagers, but composition was still stellar.
Yeah, Euronymous said that he threw away 80% of his riffs that were going towards this album and that he kept only the very best. If you want, after we're done with this, I can link all these little specific quotes in the comments or something.
yeah,
That'd
please,
be very nice.
yeah, and also for those who are interested, we've had Snorri on the podcast as well. And for those who don't know, Snorri was definitely one of the kind of bright minds behind this album and who was very important in how it was fleshed out. But
And
that's another
Mhm.
thing. There are so many kind of big names of Norwegian black metal that were involved with this album in one way or another. It's not as if like Euronymous composed everything himself. He was a lot more of a curator in the sense that he had a lot of different ideas, a lot of songs that were probably over a decade old as well before appearing on this album.
A bit like the first incantation, it was the work of many, many hands that had come and gone through Mayhem. You
Hmm.
can hear Necro Butcher, Snorre, Varg, Hellhammer, Euronymous, Attila. They all had different ideas that contributed to the final product.
You know, even Dead actually contributed to this album.
Oh
Obviously
yeah, Dead.
he did a version of Freezing Moon with him on vocals,
Mhm.
and the Life Eternal lyrics were like the last lyrics he ever wrote before he shot himself.
And the guy
Kind of
from
ironic.
Thorns organized all of those,
Yeah,
so
Snorri,
Attila could sing them.
exactly.
But Freezing Moon was actually released in 1990, very early. and you can hear Dead actually on his own song in a in a production setting instead of live.
Yeah. All right, so let's start. One thing I've always loved about this album is the production. It is absolutely well, I've always considered it like pretty much perfect for black metal.
Well, it's
And
fantastic, and it's highly influential on like later black metal with the more like orthodox stuff like Magua and stuff like that. It's it leans a lot more into the bass and the drums. Like all the toms are always extremely legible, which is fantastic because
it's
there's a
heavy,
ridiculous amount of fills.
I
which
feel
is
like the guitar
surprising.
tone
Go ahead.
is one of like the defining factors of the production. And it kind of strikes a good like balance between like obscure and like clear. Because you can hear from the guitar tone, it's very reverby, kind of like washy. I wouldn't really say obscure purely, but despite like the more, I guess, reverberated sound, everything comes in 100% clearly. You can tell all the notes that is going on, even during like the more, I guess, polyphonic and like busy sections. Everything is crystal clear despite having this sort of reverberated edge to it that makes it
Mm,
a bit
And
more raw.
and the surprising thing, it's the same producer who produced the first few Burzum albums, and the difference between those two sounds is, it's insane because those are very, thin and rasping, and De Mysteriis is so like bass heavy and strong sounding.
Yeah, I mean, what's his name? Python, I can't remember.
Python, yeah.
Yeah, he was insanely important, because I think he did what? Immortal, Mayhem, Burzum, and Emperor.
Yeah,
So so
Enslaved too, I think.
yeah. So this, despite the kind of like raw production, this was done by a guy who was a consummate professional in his field. Like this is something like he knew what he was doing, and unlike a lot of death metal and all that, like here there were like you can tell there was a very very specific idea in terms of production. I don't think they got quite what they wanted, but it was much closer than what a lot of other bands were doing, because Python actually knew what was going on.
So this guy is like Norway's Dan Swano.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And the Hellhammer actually, he set up his drums in, I think it's called Grieg Hall, to where it's a very echoing and reverby room. And Python basically said, "You're crazy for setting up your drums like this." But those toms are some of the biggest sounding toms in metal because of how he recorded them in that giant reverberating hall.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's crazy. Ultimately, that's what's funny, because people always say, "Oh, well, Norwegian black metal was fucking recorded on a fucking kid's microphone set." Whereas in reality, when you really listen to these productions, like, okay, sure, the equipment was probably pure shit. Everything was done kind of quickly, but because you had actual professionals, you got the perfect kind of production for this style of music from a lot of those early Norwegian bands. And this is probably the best case of it. Everything's perfect. I mean, the bass, when the bass melodies come out, you fucking hear them pop.
Yeah. And I don't think this record sounds very raw at all, really. It's
Mhm.
powerful, but not quite raw like, most of the others at the time.
Yeah. And obviously, um, I think it's actually Dark Throne, but this probably applies to this album as well. Where Dark Throne told, I can't remember whoever they recorded with, they said, whatever you do, we don't want to sound like Entombed. And I think with this production,
Hmm.
this is like this kind of counters the kind of bass heavy and very precise guitar sound that was really in vogue at the time, especially with the Morrisound Studio. And obviously, they had the fucking t-shirts with the the Morris, what's his name, the Morrisound guy, and his face, and it was like crossed out and everything.
Scott
Yeah,
Burns.
Scott Burns, that's the
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
yeah.
So obviously, this was like the best way. Like they wanted to do, like you could tell, like if you go back to the interview that Snorri did and everything, they were trying to piss off the death metalers as well. Like this was like trying to find its own heavy sound, but that was completely away from death metal.
Yeah. Hieronymus claimed that Dead killed himself because of a scene death metalist at one point. That people wearing tracksuits to shows was what killed Dead ultimately. Piss take, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not the mental issues that the guy definitely had or anything.
Yeah.
No,
No, certainly not.
no. All right.
The modern version of that would be like guys wearing the what are the glasses? The pit vipers. Pit vipers and bolt thrower t-shirt. That
Oh
would kill
yeah.
Dead.
Hmm.
That would kill him twice.
Yeah, dressed appropriately, you might kill a black metal vocalist. All right, let's start with the songs. Come on, let's go. What's the most defining riff of this album? Let's start with a sample.
I'd say Freezing Moon, probably.
Mm.
Yeah. All right, let's put on the intro.
Everyone knows that one.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
So the intro riff, absolute genius, but the simplest fucking thing you could ever do in terms of arpeggios on an electric guitar. It's like that basic E minor chord that everyone learns as soon as they pick up the guitar, man.
Mm-hmm. Oh
Isn't
yeah,
most
it's
of it
just like
open?
a cowboy chord. Boom. Doo-doo-doo.
Yeah, literally, it's so simple. It's just arpeggiated, It's like someone's trying to show you the first chord you learn on guitar, and you just think
Mhm.
about, I'll just fucking play each note one by one, and I like put in some triplets.
And then the
The way that
tail's just sort of like simple power chord, Metallica-ish, like Locrian type riff. Down, 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 down.
Yeah,
And it starts over. It's pretty simple. It's iconic. I think it's like the meshing of like the, lushness of like that open chord played on that distorted guitar, then like the sort of like classic heavy metal of the power chords is kind of what gives it that iconic flavor to it. Then you have the part right before the verse where it's like probably one of the most prototypical black metal riffs where he's just like open E, then he plays those triads, those minor triads an octave up, and he just moves them up and down chromatically. Like you've heard every single band use that type of riff, but Mayhem was the first to do it.
Mhm.
I
And
think
arpeggio, how does it sound so cold? Like,
I
because
think
it's so simple, and lots of people use that. And I think there's maybe two factors. One, that how they enunciate it by playing it so slowly, then the distortion just gives it some sort of ringing quality that just sounds, freezing, as the title suggests.
yeah, I think you're right.
Oh, it's a pun.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally the production plays just as much as the actual, riff shape in itself. And
But
yeah,
you
like
can
you
hear
said,
it in the studio track too from 1990. It has that same quality. I think it's just the slowness of how they play it coupled with their guitar tone.
yeah, it's really impressive. Like how much, like this is one of like the simplest iconic riffs I can think of in metal. It's like Transylvanian Hunger kind of simple, if not
Yeah.
even simpler.
Absolutely. I also had timestamps down for this song as well. I think it was 320 through 520. The
wait,
more
before we get to that, I haven't gotten over what I think is like the most iconic riff. I mean, that one is iconic, but it's not the meat of the song. The intro riff, it's iconic. Everybody knows it from memory, but it's not the meat of the song. I think the true meat of the song comes in after that first riff and like I guess the pre-verse riff where it's like boom, ba-dum, ba-dum-dum. With like the triads moving up and down.
Yeah,
Around 140, you get the little da-da-da-da-da-na, da-da-da-da-na, or it has this sort of edge to it because he's playing that tritone and moving it back up. And then those blasts kick in with Hellhammer on the drums, and he's just playing a straight tritone. He does a little fill. The verse comes in. He's just doing open E's while Attila's croaking madly. Then it ends this sort of it ends that each bar on that tritone but played twice as fast. And I just find it's interesting how they get so much energy and meat out of like this simple melodic pattern that's, been here since Black Sabbath. Because, Black Sabbath, they have their tritone riff on their self-titled song, but now they're playing like a sort of black metalized version of it with like the tremolo picking and all sorts of stuff. And after that verse is done, you get an even like more dense version of that arpeggiated tritone riff where they have like a sort of like leading tone that leads into each part of it that just gives it more momentum and energy. And they just like Mayhem's really good at just like getting as much mileage out of like simple melodic patterns as they can.
yeah. I mean, no, nothing on this song, is particularly unique. If we were to kind of like remove every piece, everything's kind of been done before by that point in black metal. But it's funny when you reassemble the whole thing, it's like it's completely unique and well for the time period. Um, and it's very difficult to mimic because a lot of these riffs were present on the works of other bands throughout the kind of history of metal up to that
Mhm.
point.
Bathory and
Just like all the
sarcophagus stand out.
nuance they add to them. I'm sorry.
Go
You can go
ahead.
first.
No, go ahead.
Okay. It's
and
just all the nuance that they add to them with like just changing up notes a tiny bit, but it still has that bass melodic pattern. It's sort of like Mayhem kind of did what Atmo Black mostly fails at, is where they linger on this one riff for a long time. But the thing is, like your stereotypical atmospheric black metal band, they'll linger on it, but they'll change nothing about it. It just becomes a mush. But Mayhem has all these sorts of nuances and ornamentations, whether it be fills on the drums or little changes of the notes or a bit of tempo experimentation. And it just brings a whole lot more life to these simplistic patterns. And you also got to give credit because they're the ones who came up with these simplistic patterns. Like I said, like moving those minor triads up and down chromatically. Every band has done that. Every Norse core band has done that, but they were the first to do it back late 80s, early 90s.
All right.
Tempest, I don't know if you remember this review, but there's specifically a review with Euronymous where they compare his guitar playing to who's the guitarist of Rush? Nick, you might know this. Maybe.
Alex Lifeson.
Yeah, where he has this skill of like playing a variation on the same melody or the same riff, but they just kind of switch it up throughout the entire song. And I definitely noticed that a lot as I was re-listening, where
Yeah, a
it's
lot of
kind
their
of variations on the same melody.
Yeah, I think I got most of what I had to say about like the verse riff and the intro down. Should we skip to Eric's section?
Yeah.
Eric, I'm guessing yours is like the sort of like groovy solo section, right?
It was the doomy section up to the groovy solo section. I was
Yeah.
kind of bringing it was kind of ironic that you mentioned Black Sabbath because that one riff that starts at 520, like the doo doo, that that just reminded me straight up of Black Sabbath. And I really like how his vocal cadence perfectly fits that. It's not like overly aggressive. It serves it as kind of a perfect backdrop to a much slower section.
Yeah, let's play it.
All right, Eric. So, what do you have to tell us about this part that you chose?
One spot that I really like about this section is uh, it pretty much is the same riff being played for 2 minutes, but the drumming and the vocals really emphasize a change that lead into the solo. You know what I mean? Because with any other band, playing the same riff for what 2 to 3 minutes would just be boring or repetitive. But with them, they always find a way to take the most bare bones thing. Like this just straight up sounds like a Black Sabbath riff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They take the most bare bones things and they spin it around and make it very interesting.
I like how the drumming starts off very slow and simplistic and then builds up until the solo and then just keeps like building and then eventually they start adding like little bits of double bass while the solo plays.
Absolutely. And that's a frequent thing that you can see with all of their stuff is it the drumming will start off slow and then he adds in more like bass hits in between stuff, and it's very interesting.
It's almost very jam band-esque the way he plays.
That is true. I didn't notice that.
I think just the simplicity of it is like why it's so iconic, because the two intervals that are most present is just like the most stereotypical metal intervals. You have the tritone, which plays during the verse, then this part is just them going 0 1 0 0 1 for 2 minutes straight.
It's certainly a product of its time too. You know, before the second wave really kicked off, a lot of the bands that were, flirting with black metal sounds were very doomy. You could consider them like extreme doom bands with screaming, a lot of them. You listen to like stuff from Brazil, like from Poland. I forget the names
The
of the band.
Samael demos. I was talking
Yeah,
about that
Samael, that
with
that
Jack
too.
earlier.
It's probably the most popular example. Who is it from Brazil who does this? There's a whole scene in Brazil. It's like kind of blackened doom. Then I think Goat Lord from the US also had some of this going on very early, like kind of black metalish stuff.
Hmm.
I
It's like
feel
late
like
80s, early 90s.
some of the Death Crush roots are kind of shown in that way too, because a lot of Death
Yeah, for
Crush
sure.
stuff is just like Death Crush is kind of like, I don't know if it's gonna sound stupid, but it seems more of like a grind sort of EP because it's just built off of those really slow, groovy sections than like insane
Fast
blasting in
blasting, it's
between
just
them.
off the
And
wall.
it's just built, the song structures are just built between like those two extremes. I
What
feel
does
like
Varg call it? A funcore album?
Funcore,
Yeah, that's what Varg called
I mean, literally is,
I
a
don't
lot
blame
of
them.
these songs, like you've got the AC/DC kind of groovy, power chord
it. Yeah.
riff. Like, for example, I'm thinking of the Carnage song, right, which has that kind of very popular riff, and here they actually take that kind of idea of a simple power chord riff, but just give it a lot more weight and importance instead of playing it against, just like random tremolo picking.
But yeah, just like a lot of that sort of like influence of like early black metal and Death Crush kind of sort of came out in this section. It's just very simple, very droning. Uses like the most obvious metal intervals, but it's really just it goes beyond because of just like what they add in between. The highlights are given more to like I guess the vocals and the drums that are just like this gradual increase of energy as Attila keeps on singing higher. And you even notice that he's like singing in pitch, sort of. It's kind of like a Mongolian throat singing type of deal where it's like he's growling and it's distorted, but he's on pitch with the guitar, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, his singing here is like it's one of the reasons why this album is so good. Like he is a perfect metal vocalist. And I think what he does, like, I think he's got definitely has a very good sense of pitch, but I think he enjoys like slithering, through the notes, kind of in and
Mm.
out of key on purpose.
Speaking of slithering in and out of key, this solo, if you look at it from an objective perspective, it sucks. It's a terrible solo. He barely plays on time, half the notes are wrong, but aesthetically, it works perfectly. And I see this as very inspirational to sort of that early DSBM French, LLN type bands where they play like shit on purpose, but it adds a whole new like it's like vibe to it because it's aesthetically consistent and it delivers what it's supposed to. Like, he's playing, as we all know, mediocrely, but there's like a sort of desperation and sort of dreariness to the playing because of just that sort of articulation.
Yeah, and
It
there's
starts
truly an
off,
appeal to that is like oh sorry, but uh which is like great musicians who purposefully like dumb themselves down for the sake of atmosphere or letting other instruments shine. And that's always been interesting to me with like LLN. If you ever watch the noisy interview with Stryborg, the guy says that like you can tell he's a great musician, but the stuff that he plays just sucks. I mean, it's great. It's great, but it just it shouldn't work, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
And
yeah. I think it's like in jazz, there's a question of taste, right? Like you have these kind of rules, and at this point, early 90s, metal was already very solidified as an entity. And these guys just figure out fucking, new ways to kind of break out of those chains to really give a lot more to the atmosphere.
And I
Oh,
think that
truly, it's.
someone
Oh, go
posited
on.
that the distortion in metal works because even if it's played kind of out of time, there's so much incidentals happening in, just like the reverberations of like the notes. Like so it's all kind of like blends together and works, I guess. But I'm not sure, that's true. I'm not a music theory guy by any means.
Mm,
And then
yeah.
after, I guess, this section, we have the end of the song. You end it on the verse riff, but it's a bit different this time. And here's what I notice with a lot of Mayhem compositions. They'll either take like the first riff or like the verse riff, the starting verse riff, and they'll put it towards the end, but they'll like mess with it a little bit to like give it even more like weight, heaviness, momentum, however you want to put it. It does that on, I think, Buried in Time and Dust. That's the one that's like 3 minutes, right?
That's
Yeah.
the most straightforward one in my
Just a
opinion.
short,
Yeah, like they
very
take the
short
verse
song.
riff and they just keep on changing keys at the end until it ends. And this is like a similar thing at the end of Freezing Moon, but it's a bit more subtle. You know how like the verse riff is just like him arpeggiating the tritone, right? Do, 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 do.
Yeah.
This time, instead of just like playing the straight tritone, he goes do, 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 do. And he just plays like a really, really high distorted chord while like the drums are just going insane with like the fills and the crashes and stuff. And it just brings that riff and it brings a whole new level like of intensity to it before just like fading out at the end. And I just feel like it's a cool trick to do because the riff is already simple, but just adding all these like different sort of all these different like sort of notes and movements to them, it can really just, get a lot out of it. And I feel like that part is just really cool to me because it's just like that's already a pretty scary, intense riff because spooky tritone, but he just like slowly amping it up throughout the course of the song. And Mayhem's just really good at just gradually amping up all the energy in their songs on this album.
Yeah, they're very good at building tension, and that's especially present on the Funeral Fog snippet that I included
Yeah, let's go
that
to
I
Funeral
showed you, Jack.
Fog. We've been on Freezing Moon for a long ass time, I feel.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah. What do you guys think is like the kind of, most experimental piece on the album?
Ooh.
The Thorn song.
Shoot, I don't know. The one part on Life Eternal with the random bridge that comes in out of nowhere and completely changes the key before just going right back into the main riff for like no reason.
I mean,
It's pretty
I,
weird.
I always felt that Life Eternal was the most narrative song on the entire album, where literally the entire song was set to match the lyrics perfectly.
I didn't analyze the lyrics at all. I mean, I think Life Eternal is probably like the most repetitive one if we're like speaking riff because he plays that do 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 do. That plays
That was
like
Varg's bass riff there.
three
Yeah,
three-fourths of the song, I'm pretty
I
sure.
know, but it's let's put on that bass melody. It's just incredible.
like how the bass is just playing, just the simple root notes until it starts its own little melody there.
Yeah, God,
That's my favorite part about that whole section.
and the bass tone is just perfect. It's really smooth. Eric mentioned Rush earlier, right? And it has the kind of
Yeah.
that Rush feeling where obviously the bass is lower than the guitar, but it's a lot brighter in tone.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And the instruments like they go in and out of focus on like what's the main
Yeah.
what has main emphasis. And that's always interesting to me on this album. Especially this song. I feel like this song is the best example of how every single instrument has a moment where they shine. It's like feature sections in jazz.
Mm. I've
Yeah,
never
I mean,
understood the argument that early black metal doesn't have a bass presence when all the early Norwegian bands had tons of bass in their music.
yeah. I want to say what's funny about the kind of melody that what the guitars are playing, literally sounds like something that was handed down to them by Swedish death metal. That kind of like almost heavy metal-esque, way of arpeggiating, a couple of simple chords, with a lot of repetition, really accentuating the power chords in that melody.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And then obviously the little kind of variation where it just goes up, by a semitone. Obviously, I think Dismember used that a lot on, Override of the Overture, the kind of main riff, where it's looped and then it goes up higher, then it goes back to the main loop, which is something that you hear a lot
Mm.
throughout this album, and especially on this riff, which is I mean it's really good by itself, but the bass and the fact that the guitars, like Eric said, just feel like they kind of pulled back quite a bit, a bit more hollow than usual, and that
Mm-hmm.
really allows the bass to kind of shine through.
I feel like I'm gonna go into some theoretical stuff right now. I feel like one of the main reasons this riff is just has a lot of staying power is that it's very subtle, but it's not really, it's a bit non-diatonic. You start off in natural minor because that open chord
Yeah.
is playing what's called guessing it's called a sus second, but the second's at the top.
Mm.
It has this like very sort of ambiguous sort of feel.
Yeah, I mean,
And he like reaches that, minor third, and it gives it a bit of sadness. But instead of lingering on that, like you said, it ends up on the semitone above, which changes it to a more, I guess, like Phrygian sort of feel. And it gives it a bit of edge because there's a tiny bit of chromaticism. It's still very melodic, but there's like a tiny bit of edge to it that sort of makes things a tiny bit unsettling and interesting. And it's definitely reflected in the bass riff and how it like arpeggiates first in natural minor, but when it goes a semitone up, it starts to emphasize that minor second note.
yeah, I mean, suspended seconds have been used, quite a bit in black metal because one, they're really, really simple chords to do on an electric guitar, and because of that, they have certain kind of like ambiguous nature. So it kind of feels and then they just go for the kind of very basic, minor third upon which all of metal is built upon, just to kind of resolve it, But it's such an easy way to add tension, to add a bit of suspense, to create something a bit more mysterious, especially as the kind of drums fade out from this part for the first bit before, the bass comes in and everything.
I
Yeah, and
want to
I
talk
feel
about
like
the bridge. Oh,
that's why like
no.
Phrygian is used so heavily in black metal is because it's just generally a very ambiguous sounding type of thing. It adds mystery.
Oh,
I
yeah.
I
want to
don't
talk
know.
about the bridge. The
All right.
bridge to me is crazy because it does, at first, it has like a level of cohesion. It does like a sort of cool like transition to a E minor sort of flavor by using the boo da 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 boo da 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 boo da 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 da. You know the riff I'm talking about, right?
I know
Oh,
exactly the
absolutely.
triplet riff, yeah.
It kind of like uses that like sort of it has a sort of harmonic minor flavor, then it goes into like E minor. And it's like, okay, they're moving somewhere. It's changing the key because they already lingered on it with riff for a while. But then after that, it has this really weird arpeggio in like I don't even know what the key is at this point, but it has this like, you know, the one where it's just like right
Yeah.
before it
Oh
goes
yeah, that
back into the
strange
verse riff.
tempo change that they never really go back to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
that's just it's very weird because that riff sounds nothing like the rest of the song, and instead of like having that like completely go into another section, it kind of just appears and disappears, but it doesn't feel like like it's disparate, but it doesn't really subtract from like the already established atmosphere because it was already a previously established song before. But having that little like sort of deviation sort of gives it a lot more character, which I appreciate in such a repetitive song.
Sounds like
And
if
if
you
we listen a
paired.
bit more, oh,
Go
you want
ahead.
to go? Okay,
Go
okay.
ahead.
If we listen a bit more to the end of that song, that weird bridge section is sort of I would say what's the word? Resolved because it has like the same intervals. Like you know the riff that goes do 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 do
yeah.
do because it uses those same intervals, those like do 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 that transitioned it from the main riff to the bridge, but it's completely recontextualized towards the end of the song because this is when it starts blasting, it starts becoming intense. Instead of being mysterious, it has more of like an edge to it. And it's just I feel like it's a good, subtle, and interesting way to sort of resolve that weird disparate bridge section that culminates in just like a good conclusion of the song.
Yeah, this is actually a funny song in that when you hear it as a whole, because it's so obsessed with that bass melody and what the guitar's doing, and obviously, towards the end of the song, the guitar kind of plays that bass melody too, right? But when you really
Hmm.
zoom in on it, like this is like in terms of the riffs, it's really one of the most ambitious songs they've done, and that really falls out of the kind of you don't really see black metal bands taking much from the riffs presented on this song for the most part. There isn't a lot of tremolo picked riffs. Um, there, a lot of the tremolo is just like kind of it's not even power chords. The tremolo picking is just kind of like weird two-note chords. With the where they leave like an extra string, open. I'm not sure if that was done on purpose, but it's just got this insane quality to it when you hear it. That especially with the distortion that just feels like nah. I can't really think of anything else that reminds me of it.
Hmm. It adds like a sort of dissonance to it that isn't like very typical because we're used to like hearing like the tremolo picked power chords or the tremolo picked thirds, but just doing those like more strange chords that are still in the key, it gives them a lot more of I guess a lot more trying to think of how to put this, but the timbre is it's a lot more interesting, I guess, to put it sort of bluntly. I wanted
Spicy.
to come up with like a good adjective,
Yeah.
but it's just interesting. It's better, not better, but it's like it's good at maintaining some sort of interest as opposed to just tremolo picking, straight power chord.
Yeah.
I think Burzum used that a lot too. He typically had a lot of riffs that used the all the strings of the guitar, a lot of them being open. I feel like Mayhem does a lot of the open string things as well, and it just kind of adds to the atmosphere because you have all these disparate notes coming together.
Yeah, and Ishan said that like, I can't remember. I think it was Into the Infinity of Thoughts. He was saying people weren't playing it properly because they weren't making all the notes ring and everything.
Yeah, because
That
you couldn't hear all of them.
yeah.
They're all mushed together.
But I think that that's really one of the advantages this kind of like hollow, almost feeble guitar sound gave us. Compared to death metal, because if you have a death metal tone and you try to play those chords, it'll sound like absolute fucking dog shit.
Hmm.
But here,
And that really just goes back to their tone, just a testament to how good their tone is in general.
Yeah, that's what it kind of goes back to like the production I was talking about, how it has that sort of it was like sort of the introduction of like the very washy and sort of reverberated like black metal tone, but it still has a lot of clarity to it.
I mean, yeah, as much as we love the composition on this album, I think when you don't have the Hellhammer drumming, when you don't have Attila's voice, when you don't have the guitar sound, you don't have Python's production, all of it kind of it's not that it falls apart, but it would lose so much of what makes this album special. I think it's more reliant on its aesthetic elements than any other black metal album from this period.
Mm-hmm. I think that's
Yeah,
good. I think that's good enough for Life Eternal. I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about Funeral Fog because Funeral Fog is an awesome song.
All right.
I would
Uh,
also like that.
hit
I
us up
have
with.
the intro,
Okay.
like 0 to 130.
All right. Let's put that on. All right, Jack, start us off with Funeral Fog.
So, like I said about that one section of Freezing Moon at the end, how like the ending riff will take, I guess, beginning riff and just change a tiny bit of it. There's another compositional tool that I realize is pretty consistent throughout this album as well, and is that this start of many songs usually will be like a blast with a certain arpeggio that just goes up and down chromatically. And Funeral Fog, the first song, the first riff you hear, is a great example of it because you have like the do 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 do. Then he
Dude,
goes down by a half step and repeats that. And that's just a
Mm-hmm.
very characteristic thing about the album. They like to do that a lot. I forget all the songs that have it. Maybe I'll remember later when we get to them, but that's one of the big things that they like to do on this album.
I just love
Yeah,
the
after
tempo
that intro
changes in that.
riff, they switched down keys from I think it's originally an A down to G. And this is where it gets really cool because it keeps this blast going, but it keeps that arpeggiated of the original riff going, or arpeggiated character of the original riff going, and it switches between that do 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 and this pretty like this riff fragment that's like sort of has a bit more edge to it. It kind of sounds more like a death metal riff because of like how short and like, you know, spastic it sort of is. It's the one that goes like do 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 do, and he just switches between those two riffs, and then he speeds up that arpeggio again, and it just has a very natural, gradual flow to it before going into, you know, iconic verse riff. And that's just one thing that Mayhem does. They have these huge intro sections that are just like usually just like blasting, but there's a lot of nuance in the guitar parts and how they like converge and merge and sort of like synthesize with each other that gives it a sort of this, you know, prototypical black metal flow that I think is really influential.
Yeah, and I love how a lot of the kind of if we were to break this kind of intro up, it one of the parts kind of comes back, but it's played like maybe like a bit higher, and it serves as the kind of like chorus, except obviously the part where he goes funeral fog, right?
Mhm.
But a lot of these kind of like a lot of the melodies are introduced. This isn't a death metal thing, where your intro is gonna have like three-quarters of the like genetic material for your song, but then throughout the rest of your song, you're just kind of you're just gonna develop those ideas and give them a lot more room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, actually, that's interesting because I've noticed that too. I feel like this is gonna be off topic, but I feel like a lot of monstrosity songs do that where they'll have like complete riff salad at the beginning. Then later on they like string it all together and it's just like, oh, so that's what they were doing.
That's Millennium in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see how Mayhem does that by like having those like intros that are just like a ton of riffs that gradually build onto each other before taking a more slower turn with like the verse.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I feel like this song specifically has a great sense of pace. Did we already go over that snippet? Because I was gonna go over the
What was
next one.
yours?
Yeah, let's go over
Mine
your snippet.
was 3:30 through 4. So, one specific thing that I noticed about this section is if you listen to the crash cymbals, the first phrase he will do 2 hits on the crash cymbal, and then for later phrases he'll just switch it to 1, or he will just completely like get rid of that. And I think that really it really helps the movement of the music because it's not just straight blasting. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like you could just put double bass and you could just put double bass and crashes or ride cymbals and bells over this, but he really just masterfully inserts his symbols in a very interesting way.
I almost feel like
And
he's making a
Hellhammer just
solo out of his
knows
symbols. It's kind of weird.
Hellhammer just knows how to like accent these riffs. Like I feel like Funeral Fog is like a good like exhibit of just like Hellhammer's like skill as like a drummer, not even just in the technical sense, but just like the compositional sense as well. Because you know, the verse riff, he does that crazy tom stuff at the tail end of the riff. And you know, that stuff sounds huge, but it doesn't detract from the riff because the riff will just have that initial main melody, then it'll just like, you know, open pick, and that's when he shines with his like tom fills. And here he knows exactly when he should, you know, have those like crash accents to those little tritone notes that, you know, are in the guitar. And he just has a very good momentum and just feel for how the rhythm of like the riffs are supposed to be felt. And it just adds a lot more impact.
And would Bard Faust drumming on the Nightside Eclipse be the same without, having the influence of Hellhammer? I'm not sure that it would because he does a lot of the same sort of things on the Nightside Eclipse.
Yeah, I mean, even Fenris to an extent, it's this idea of kind of like including the drummer as an actual composer, not just the kind of arrangement, not like where a lot of death metal is just kind of like, okay, you have your generic beats, but you have to line them up for each kind of riff type. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
guy,
that's that.
Butchered
Oh,
at
sorry.
birth.
yeah, yeah, but I'm just saying it's like it feels like guys have got like a library of drum riffs, right, and a few fills, and it's like I'm gonna take a bit from A, repeat A 4 times, go into B, and go back to A, try a drum riff C, etc. You know what I mean? There's sometimes a lack of like a personal touch.
Yeah. And drumming we call that like a rhythm toolkit. And that's all that you get in, you know, a lot of like death metal is, and especially black metal. If you listen to Ildjarn, like
Oh yeah.
you know what I'm talking about. I love them, but it's just
It
it's
fits with
kind of just
Eldjarn though.
hmm?
Well,
I would
sometimes
say
it's a
that
good
it fits
aesthetic
the
choice.
Eldjarn aesthetic, to be honest.
Oh, it definitely fits, but I more so am just I'm just using that as an example where
Yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't really it's not taking a compositional edge, it's just acting as kind of a rhythm meter or even a metronome for the rest of the music. You know what I mean?
We
And
get that from Transylvanian
Mayhem,
Hunger too, right? But it was more
yeah,
of a aesthetic choice on Transylvanian Hunger to make it as simplistic as possible as far as drumming goes.
absolutely. But like I said, he breaks out of the toolkit, and every single line that the drum plays is always, you know,
Oh
it
yeah.
always perfectly fits the music and pushes everything forward in a compositional way. And I
Mhm.
think that's underutilized in a lot of black metal. I was
Yeah.
talking about the influence on Magua earlier. Their drummer Darkside, I think his name is Darkside, but he takes must take huge influence from this because he does a lot of those like shuffles on the hi-hats and the snares or this and the snare just to break up certain sections and push the music into a new direction. And you can see that first developing here, and I think that's really cool.
He's definitely the best part of that band.
Oh, absolutely. I do like the lyrics though. They're at times they're kind of cheesy, but they're genuine at least.
Mm.
The Magua video now.
Mago
God.
video now.
Yeah, but you know what I love what he does. It's just the way his drumming just kind of like releases at the the kind of 4 minute mark. You know when the song's main melody comes, he's like, all right, now I've got to tone it back all of a sudden, right? But he's not trying to kind of like dominate attention as much, which is really what makes this album so genius. Just everyone knowing their place and doing the best for the song.
I just had an epiphany right now. Actually, no,
Uh,
it's probably not an epiphany. It's just like a little thing I noticed. But that that one, you know how at the after this section, the guitars kind of synthesize the two riffs before where it's like boom, bow, down, down, bow, bow, bow.
Yeah.
It kind of it kind of reminds me a bit of the Freezing Moon riff, but like tremolo picked instead because you have your arpeggiated E minor chord, then little Locrian power chords sort of walk down. And I was just like, oh, I didn't notice that those two were kind of melodically similar until now.
hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, they knew what worked for them and what worked within the production. So and they're very good at just kind of like using what should be considered fundamental black metal techniques, even though some of the songs kind of completely step out of what fundamental black metal is. But
Mhm.
it's just really interesting at how well they're able to recycle a lot of the kind of same genetic material throughout these songs.
Should we do Pagan Fears?
Yeah. All right. What's your timestamp for DM for Pagan Fears?
Pagan Fears, let me see this shit. So, 3:30 to 5 minutes.
Okay, fuck it, do that. All right.
right. Pagan Fears. So this is sort of like Pagan Fears to me. I personally prefer Pagan Fears, but Pagan Fears is sort of like a actually I don't even know if I could say that. For Pagan Fears is like a combination of like every one of the songs, to be honest. Because it has that awesome symphonic section, the one that we just played, that's reminiscent of DMDS, but it also has that sort of like simple verse riff that just uses a couple intervals that plays for a long time, like Freezing Moon. And it has that cool groovy intro riff. That's actually I don't know what song that's in. That's kind of original to this song, I'm pretty sure. Unless there's another one that I'm not thinking of.
Also, there's a like probably my second favorite bass line on the album comes in around 3 or 4 minutes, where it's it's just a riff being played and then the bass is playing very sparse notes over that, and I think that's
Oh,
really
you're talking
sick.
about so when they first start going polyphonic, the bass notes is just kind of like going do 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 in the back.
Yeah.
I was gonna mention there's very, very few polyphonic parts of this album, which is like, as black metal went on, polyphony just kind of became the standard, if your band's like Abigor and whatever. And it's sort of rare here. Like they're mostly just playing in unison, but when they do play different notes, it's like used to like the maximum effect. And I feel like it's particularly um effective in this song and also in DMDS. This song, mostly because the rest of like the song before it was sort of simple. Also, I remember the other song I was going to relate this freaking song to. So it's like a combination of DMDS, Freezing Moon, and there's this one riff that's also eerily similar to like Life Eternal. Like that weird time signature riff where it's like Buddha da Buddha da boom boom Buddha da boom boom.
Yes.
Yes, that is literally the same chord progression as Life Eternal, but played in like a strange, odd time signature and a bit faster. They sort of do an A B section between the intro riff and that riff. And so I just see like, yeah, a lot of shared musical ideas, but just put into different contexts. But yeah, after that intro, you get like do 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 do. Like that riff is literally just like, I'm gonna be straight up, that's a slam tier riff. It's literally like two notes. It's two different notes or three different notes all right next to each other on the fretboard, but it's all building up to this great climax at this section where they go truly polyphonic, symphonic, however you want to do it, with like all these guitar harmonies just like, meshing together with one another and the bass part, and it provides a very good point of contrast between I guess the pretty simplistic and droning like verse riff that's just like a
And the
couple
build up to
chromatic
that,
notes.
they're just droning the chords from that riff you just mentioned, basically.
Wait, really?
Yeah,
I'm confused. Like you're talking about the
the build up
polyphonic riff,
before
right?
the blast beats, and it's just double bass in the section we're talking about.
Oh yeah, where
Yeah, it's
it
just
it has
playing.
like the blast section that goes
It's
like
just
do
droning.
do do do, and they add just like a
Yeah.
harmony like halfway through the part.
Mm.
It makes it sound a lot more huge. But yeah, just that whole section is just like a necessary deviation from what we have during like the verse riff that was very simple. And
To
it's
me,
just like that
it's
sort of
the
contrast is what makes it particularly special. And there's only like two instances of that throughout the whole entire album where they go have that sort of like harmonic density to it.
that's the best part of the album, just for me, because of the build up and then just that wild, unhinged, you know, it's not even a melody really.
Hmm.
It's just like textures, strewn together. It's so passionate and powerful. The magic of black metal right there is encapsulated, I think.
Absolutely. I
And
really, really like that first riff too. That's one of my favorite like intro riffs to the entire album.
you talking about the one that has like the boom da na na na.
Yeah,
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
it's super fun to play. I could be wrong, but the second time around, does he throw in like pinch harmonics? Because it's the pitch or the timbre sounds a bit different. I could be wrong though.
I think he's just playing like tritones, like not arpeggiating tritones, but like an actual like two notes of the tritone that make it sound a bit more distorted. and edgy. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
because I didn't
also
think it was
notice.
quite
Oh,
pinch
continue.
harmonics, but I knew it was a change and I wasn't sure what it was. But
Another
yeah.
thing about this song, apart from like that cool polyphonic section, all of the beginning riffs are kind of built off that same chord progression of that like
Mhm.
do 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 do. Because you have like the dun 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 da 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 da, and it goes to do 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 do. Just those like 0 1 2 1 sort of chord progression that's being referenced throughout the whole entire song. Besides that polyphonic part, which I find a bit interesting how they have that sort of melodic consistency.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think once again, like the song's got a very obvious climax. If we refer to kind of like song structures in the most general sense, and the fact that all the elements of the climax are present throughout the entire song, and it's just kind of like variations of variations that all kind of culminate at one point. And it's fantastic. And then there's even another variation, where he sings, pagan fears, the past is alive. And his vocals add an extra layer to that, which is why I love his vocal style on this. It's still within the realms of tonality, but it's got such a unique and weird harshness to it.
There's a good rasp to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, after that, it just plays. I think it just plays like the verse riff a tiny bit more before it ends. I mean, that's all it needs. It's not like it needs like a spectacular ending when you
Yeah,
already have that awesome like bridge section that basically is the climax of the song.
yeah, that
Just
completely
kind of
makes
makes
the
it
entire
end a bit
song
more
for me.
smooth.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing they do. They rarely end, the songs with the climax. The climax kind of happens like maybe just a little after halfway throughout the song. It's not
Hmm.
I'd say like with kind of heavy metal and thrash metal stuff, the climax was always the kind of like very predictable ending solo or kind of like extended chorus with like more harmonized leads, etc. This is like they're really kind of breaking apart from everything we know about heavy metal at that point.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, it kind of is like it's more just like recapitulations and that sort of stuff, like earlier riffs in the song coming back, but they change a little bit of it.
Yeah, and
As we
I
mentioned earlier,
definitely
they do that
noticed the
all the
thing
time.
where yeah, I noticed where you were talking about how they kind of sparsely use those polyphonic moments, but I think that's really where moments like that shine the most is whenever it's used very sparingly. They're very good at like stripping things back and you know making moments like that impact a lot more.
Yeah, it feels like it's weird because they have all these sorts of like different styles of black metal riffs. Because with the polyphonic, you get a bit of like melodic black metal and a bit of atmospheric black metal. Then you have like those very simplistic power or tremolo pick power chords that you'll get in like a war metal song or like a Beharit type black metal. It
We've
just kind
got
of
Black
covers
Doom
all
riffs,
this
of
sort of
course.
ground and all these sort of genres sort of just branched out from this sort of like singular entity.
Hmm.
Yeah, and everything's so cohesive. It's literally the right tool that fits. And I think what's funny is because by being sparse with the kind of polyphonic parts, like you said, it makes them shine because I can think of the exact opposite. I can think of the Dark Funeral, Secrets of the Black Arts, right? Which has consistent polyphony throughout, and it actually just kind of fucking gets in bits into that kind of like background noise territory at times because it's so ham-fisted and obvious the way they do it.
Hmm. That's me with Abigor.
Yeah. It's like drinking after you've had a good moment or drinking every day.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
And let's go to the DMDS part because that's the other polyphonic part I want to reference because it has like it's similar in the sort of like vibe and like the melody of it, but the context is removed a bit from Pagan Fears enough to make it interesting on its own.
Where is the polyphonic part of that song?
3 minutes in.
Okay, I don't remember it having that section.
Three
Oh,
to
I guess
four.
wait, is that I guess it's not polyphonic. It has a similar vibe though to Pagan Fears though. This is the other sort of like, it's a similar climax to Pagan Fears, but the context is a bit different. I want to go back to something that Tempestuous Might said, how Euronymous said this album isn't riff based, right? Is that what he said?
Yeah, he said he said he was saying death metal was all riff based, but he was not making music to be riff based. He was making it to be composition based.
Okay. I don't know if I'm interpreting this in like the greatest or I don't know if I'm interpreting this right, but I feel like he was being a bit facetious when he was saying that, because a lot of these songs, they're full of riffs. You can
Yeah,
like hear it and you're like, oh yeah, but this song is an exception. I feel like this is like the only song that it has riffs,
plays
but
off kind of one idea, doesn't it,
it
compared to the rest?
feels more, instead of like having straight riffs that play like exactly, if I feel
Mhm.
like it functions more on like chord progressions and motifs.
Mm.
Because like you have your like main motif that goes like boo now na 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 now, and that kind of gets spliced up throughout the song, but it's always in like a different context. So it's more of like a motif than like a straight riff, I
Yeah,
would say, because it's always just being recontextualized. And they don't even really play riffs here. It's just a lot of like chord progressions that slowly build up and move. And they go a little bit more like neoclassical with them too. Like how they'll like go switch from like the flat fifth into like the or the a minor fifth into the major not fifth, the minor seventh to the major seventh, to kind of like bring that extra bit of like harmonic minor drama into it. And there's a bit of whole tone too to it, if you guys notice. Like, did anybody notice like the whole tone chord progressions going on?
No, no, not really. I
yeah,
think
no.
it's so kind of like densely harmonized, and
Hmm.
you obviously you have the elephant in the room, which is Attila's kind of like pseudo operatic singing as well, which just draws in so much attention in itself.
But yeah,
Yeah, the closest, like, you can see a lot of his operatic singing on Vedwin's End, which kind of takes that to the extreme. Uh, and I don't know, it's definitely a style of black metal vocals that I feel like people should explore a lot more, because a lot of the time it takes kind of a percussive backdrop to the music, where it's just an extra layer of percussion on top of the drums. Whenever you're playing like more strung out trim pick sections, but he plays it's much different. That's what I'm trying to say. It provides a perfect background.
yeah,
Yeah,
but what I
definitely.
was trying to set up basically was that how the context is removed from Pagan Fears. Pagan Fears is very riff based, very repetitive, and it usually just plays like, those very unison parts up until the climax. Here, there's sort of like a thing going on where there's like the lead and then there's the chord progressions going on, and the lead is spliced in between these chord progressions, how it acts more of a motif than like a riff. And these chord progressions just are very, very slow, gradual, and smooth. So it doesn't really feel like riffs, but just like it's sort of like neoclassical in the way it moves, and it just builds up that whole tone part where it just goes stepwise motion up until this part at 3 minutes, which I believe is probably the best part of the album, where it takes that sort of beginning motif and extends upon it, makes it more slow, makes it more doom laden, and just has a very, very gothic neoclassical like flair to it. And it just slowly builds up with these neoclassical, I guess, chord progressions and simple stepwise melodies, but that are like slow yet dramatic before just going in and restarting from the beginning and then leading us up to that last chord from the whole tone sort of chord progression to the final E minor that like ends the whole entire album. And it's just it feels like this is the song that Euronymous was probably referring to when he said he was trying to distance himself from the riff because of the less focus on the riffs
And
and
it's one of the later written songs as well. It
intention.
wasn't around in like it wasn't played live back in the day. You know, it wasn't on live in Leipzig or whatever
I
from
mean,
like
yeah, it
91.
makes sense considering like the development of black metal seemed to like be like straying further from the riff. Like
Yeah,
out of like the
these droning
big
textures.
Norwegian bands, I'd say the ones that were like truly the one that was only like truly like riff based was Immortal. I guess not saying the others weren't, but they all had their albums where they were just kind of like getting rid of the riff. Like
Yeah,
Transylvanian Hunger,
for
not
sure.
too much of like a focus on riffs. Immortal was like the only true tried and true riff band I feel of like the big
Mm.
Norwegian bands.
And that really comes from their thrash influence, I think.
Yeah, thrash, heavy metal, hard rock, like they were all into that kind of like that kind of mix. You know, they didn't want. I don't think they wanted to distance themselves from the, the legacy set by death metal. But I think here, yeah, this track, um, I don't think there's anything quite like it because while it does, want to distance itself from the riff, it still recognizes the riff as a tool to achieve what it needs to achieve, right? It's not like I don't want to sound condescending, but a lot of these bands, these atmospheric black metal bands, they'll have, hey, we have a cool chord progression, repeat 16 times, add reverb, end. Right? There's actually like, there are actual ideas within the riffs. It's not just like fucking, we're gonna blast out the fucking notes from XYZ motif. There's an actual
It's static and it doesn't change any. There's
yeah.
no internal motion, unlike in Mayhem.
Yeah, because this is like there's consistent chord progressions, but it gradually like shifts between like these chord progressions. It's not just like a straight, just like I don't know, 4 8 bar progression, but they are switching in between these, adding little motifs and little ornaments here and there before eventually culminates in that big climax polyphonic section at 3 minutes. And I feel like that is what makes this song particularly special among uh the MDS in general because it's just composed in a lot more of just like a sort of, narrative classical way. There's not really, I wouldn't even say there's like verses or choruses on here like the other songs, but it's just, gradual building of these you know, melodies until that section.
Yeah.
Kind of variations on a theme instead of like fully fleshing out the scene or the theme at the beginning of the song and then just letting that completely rule everything. It's kind of slowly building up and, forming something concise, which is very skillful, I think.
Yeah,
And it's
I mean,
kind of similar to what Enslaved did in the last track of their first album, where it's just there's two simple things that repeat against each other, and then they just keep building and adding instrumentation, which is kind of an extreme version of what is happening here, I guess.
yeah, obviously, Euronymous was very influenced by electronic music. I'm talking, the kind of early electronic stuff.
For sure.
And that really, plays out in, really making this kind of antithesis to death metal that he always wanted to. But
The atmospheric layering.
he does it in a way that's one, it doesn't feel boring. It doesn't descend into fucking, atmospherics. But he does it in a really kind of peculiar way, because the only thing that kind of comes close to this would probably be Philosophem and Hyvislis. But even though the way they approach the kind of atmospheric element is completely different to this one.
Yeah, I feel like Philosophem and I can't pronounce it. Hyvislis Taros, I feel like they progress a little less. I feel like Mayhem were doing the hypnosis, sort of like, very repetitive sort of thing, but it was a bit different than your Burzums or Dark Throne on Transylvanian Hunger, because they mostly did one-to-one repetition, while Mayhem was sort of just like very gradual with their changes.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And it, has one of kind of might be the best climax in black metal. And you know what Attila does with his voice here is it's also on another level. I think Hellhammer's drumming is absolutely fantastic. Sure, Varg's bass kind of takes the back seat, but there's already so much going on in terms of layers and everything. It's like, I wish we could get more of this from black metal. This is something that's like that we're never gonna ever see again in the history of black metal, I feel, sadly.
You can tell they worked on this album for quite a long time.
If this had synths, this would probably be considered symphonic black metal.
I mean, the melodic and harmonic language is so developed that it might as well be. All right.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go. Legacy of this album. One thing I've noticed, I think pretty much every other album from this era has been replicated. I've seen like ideas have been taken from this, but no one has really tried to follow closely to this except for what's the fucking band that had the guy from this Vatane on their first two are the
Yes.
only that's the only
Yeah.
time this album has been, someone's tried to replicate it.
I
think
was going to
maybe
bring that up
Morketida
specifically.
too from Finland.
Yes, because uh the 2013 Vatane album, The Wild Hunt, takes like huge influence in this, especially in the drumming and the lead parts. It doesn't quite scratch the same itch, of course.
They don't know how to do
but
that.
no, not at all. But like I guess with I talked earlier about orthodox black metal, and that's really where you can see the biggest influence. Like even on the first Death Spell Omega album, I would say that they progress the songs in a similar way. The way that they use drum fills and cymbals to like accentuate the movement of the song is very similar. Of course, the tonality and stuff is different, but it's definitely a highly influential album. And people have drawn a lot of different things from it.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I noticed that all like the big Norwegian players, their signature style on whatever album that became popular has kind of like been sort of like, replicated a lot. Like with Immortal, you got, your Norse core bands, like your Marduk and
Inquisition.
stuff. And
From Pure Holocaust onwards.
And then your Transylvanian Hunger, as well as Burzum, they kind of like
Under a Funeral
invented
Moon as
atmospheric
well.
black metal with, their albums. But I don't think I can name a single album that I've heard that is a DMDS worship.
I can name
The first
simply
two
one.
Vatane. I'll say the Cassius, whatever it's called. Cassia, I can't remember.
I've never heard Watain before, which is I don't
Oh
know if
my
that's
God.
surprising or not.
I'll say Morketida's debut from Finland. Their 2018 album does this. But I think maybe the reason for that is, maybe a lot of these ideas felt outdated by 94 when the album finally saw release, because Mayhem, they still had a lot of ideas that were pre-second wave. And, the rest of the Norwegians were already hearing all these ideas, but the rest of the world hadn't heard them yet. So the Norwegians were building off what Mayhem were doing. And no one else really had gotten to hear the album unless you were from that small kind of insulated scene. So they're all able to build on it.
Yeah, so it was
And
like
that's kind
ahead
of
of its
what I,
time when it was first recorded, but by the time
Yeah,
that it was
because
like
it came out
out,
on, yeah,
people,
exactly. Because it came out in '94, and Burzum already had 3 albums that came out before it. Immortal had 2, Dark Throne had 3, you know, that
yeah, it kind of
full
goes
length's
into
already
what I was
released.
thinking
Hmm.
about like how Mayhem was sort of like just like the primordial like soup of all these like styles. Because
Yeah,
you can
really.
see a bit of like Transylvanian hunger in it. You can see a bit of
Hmm.
Visliset Taras in it. You can see a bit of Immortal in it. I mean, the only thing that really I think is a bit like outdated compared to when it was recorded is that there's some, I wouldn't say outdated, but there are some like still some of that like first wave influence I feel in like the more primitive power chord riffs that you'd see in something like, Blasphemy or Sarcophago, because they were big fans of them if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
Sarcophago, more so.
And I remember now that there's a pic with Hellhammer wearing a Blasphemy t-shirt.
Hmm.
And
Tormentor as well, but of course, obviously, Attila's on there, so
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's funny. But yeah, I always think that kind of Wolf's Lair Abyss and the Grand Declaration of War were ate a lot more than this album, despite being on a musical level a lot more complex than this.
absolutely. I think people kind of dismiss a lot of later Mayhem releases, but I sincerely don't think they have a single bad album. Ordo Ad Cow is extremely unique. It draws a lot from the newer wave of black metal that leans more into like dissonance instead of consonance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Blue Cross
It's
Nord, Despel Omega, that sort of
yeah,
thing.
it's that kind of stuff, and I think it's very cool, and it's also uniquely different from that stuff. Like if you listen to Esoteric Warfare, a lot of these riffs sound like Voivod. Like a
Mm.
lot of their riffs just sound like just straight up black metal Voivod, and I think they've always retained a lot of the skill when it comes to songwriting. It definitely will never peak as it has on this album, but I
They're
definitely
interesting to
think,
listen to, but I don't know. I've never felt like they've been able to recapture that spirit or
I don't
create
know.
something like as wholly, powerful as DMDS.
But they never try to like that. I think that's incredibly important. Like, you
Mm.
know, when Blasphemer kind of took over the kind of creative reins of the band, like he was definitely very inspired by Euronymous. You can tell that especially on Wolf's Lair Abyss. But he took the band in a completely different direction. Like he had those kind of basic elements, and he did like something very interesting. I agree with Eric. Mayhem's never had a bad or boring album ever.
Hmm.
To me, Wolfslayer Abyss is almost kind of like a blueprint for like Norsecore in a way,
Mm. I
just because
gotta
they're taking everything that happens in like Life Eternal and Curse in Eternity and just they're playing off that the whole time for the most part.
I really like how Maniac is like almost an opposite to Attila because his voice is just one of the most like it it's you know it's just extremely guttural and percussive compared
Hmm.
to well Attila is guttural, but you know what I mean. I think he takes a much more percussive edge, which makes the music seem a lot more urgent. And really, every vocalist that Mayhem has ever had has been really great and unique compared to most Norwegian black metal.
Yeah,
I was gonna
definitely.
say, I had something in my notes I was gonna say. I was gonna epically own Dead fans, but both Attila and Maniac just like blow Dead out of the water, to be honest. Like I respect the guy. He pretty much invented like the second wave black metal sort of vocal style. But I think that is in a way why I don't really have that same appreciation for him. Because if you just turn on any black metal, you'd just be like, okay, this guy sounds like Dead. But Attila and Maniac, they have their own senses of style that sort of, they're still unique to this day, even if they're like not as influential or replicated as Dead's was.
I mean, Nocturnal Culto did the same thing as Dead, but better
That's true.
from Blaze onwards.
Yeah, who knows where Dead would have been if he hadn't ended his life so prematurely.
I mean, who knows what would happen? Had Snorri recorded parts on this album, had Necro
Yeah.
Butcher recorded instead of Varg, there are so many
Hmm.
what ifs, so many insanely creative minds in on this explosion, and a highly media-sized situation surrounding them. The conditions from which this album came from are something so unique. It's like making magma out of a rock. When you have that
Yeah.
much pressure,
And
teenage angst, everything.
doesn't the artwork also come from Snorri?
I think he did. Yeah, he did it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a picture like from a newspaper of that church, and he colored it. And I think Varg at one point claimed that on the day of the release, they were going to blow that church up or something crazy like that. And Varg was caught with like so many kilos of dynamite, that he was keeping in this old World War II like bunker-esque cave somewhere. And
That's
that's
just some like
probably what he was going to do with it. He was probably going to use that to blow up the fucking church if we put two and two together.
that's like some cartoon villain shit, like
Yeah,
blowing up a
really.
church with dynamite.
Yeah,
Like,
it's just crazy.
All right.
Shows how out there Varg was.
Any closing words? I mean, obviously the drama surrounding this is actually really funny when you think
It's
about it, and
fascinating,
tragic.
honestly.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, any final words on the music?
Mayhem's the darkest band in history, apparently.
According to that YouTube documentary.
He's super evil. Now, but
Death Crush isn't that good, by the way.
yeah,
It's really
fuck it,
not.
I'll say it. You know what? This is an album that I think, I don't know what you call it. It's actually really dark, and man, I'm so fucking tired. I haven't slept. I'm
The
gonna
more I
edit this
listen
out.
to it, the more
you're
I
right
gain an
though. I see what you're
appreciation
getting at.
for it.
Yeah.
The more I listen to it, the more I get an
Absolutely.
appreciation for the details of it.
Yeah, it's like the perfect culmination of coincidences. There's so many things stacked up against this album that it made it feel like it, wasn't going to release or was going to be
Yeah,
a completely different lineup. And it's just kind of perfect. And I think a lot of the newer generation of
I was gonna
black
mention
metal
that
fans,
too.
they really need to learn to appreciate it, because I know they draw a lot from like Transylvanian Hunger and Dark
Oh,
Throne, but
Yeah,
really
yeah,
this
dude,
it's
is
so
that's an interesting thing you
underappreciated
mentioned.
in these days.
There's like a TikTok, there's like a TikTok Zoomer retaliation against Mayhem now, because apparently it's cringe to like them, or at least DMDS. I don't know.
Oh
I
my
But it's
still
kind
think
of
god.
I
like,
still see people like defend Death Crush in that community because I guess First Wave is awesome and cool, but
even though
DMDS,
it's largely inferior to second wave.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Before we get into the Zoomers and all that, I just want to say, like Eric said, this album had no reason existing, and somehow it manages, and it's better than anything that anyone could have hoped for. It's truly dark. It's truly evil, but it's not. People misconstrue it as being like evil in a cartoonish way, but no, it's like, I think it's really the kind of angst, the pressure, the weird social climate they were in, like everything. That it's just as
it's very much
fascinating.
alive.
Yeah.
It like has its own personality, and that's that's something that a lot of black metal misses, is because it focuses a lot more on like riffs or something of that sort, but this focuses on songwriting, and it really gives the illusion of like a living, breathing album with actual personality behind it.
Mhm. It's kind of weird to consider that a bunch of like the greatest art of all time came from people with like such screwed up minds.
Hmm.
This is like a prime
Yeah.
example of that.
Yes, multiple screwed up minds with it, the whole world looking at them, at the same time, and an insane amount of drama that people are still obsessed with to this day.
Euronymous was a communist, not because it was a great economic system to him, but because it caused the most people to suffer under certain dictatorships.
That makes
Isn't
me
that
angry
lovely?
because it's like sketchy people just like they call him a communist and everything, and they think it's a moral choice, but it's quite
No.
the opposite. He did this out of pure edginess, and it's like if they recognize that, I think they would really learn to appreciate him and
Yeah.
his art more.
you,
He
you
definitely was a scammer though. He was freaking doing scam rack scam rap back in the 1990s.
Yeah, for real.
I
He was
think
the
that's
first
sick.
TJX6.
Bro, he scammed Digby Pearson from fucking scam legends Earache Records, man. Like he scammed the scam god.
Legendary.
Yeah. You know, I think we're gonna end this with this. You know, this album is insanely edgy and pretentious, but against all odds, it fucking lives up to that edginess and pretentiousness, you know?
They felt
Yeah.
what they were talking about. They somehow managed to channel it.
All right. I think we're done for now before we go on forever. All right, thank you very much, guys.
Rock on!
We have fun around here.
What is this fun you speak of?